Hi, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. This is part of my ongoing series of watching Star Trek Discovery and talking about some of the narrative elements in it. This is about season 1, episode 4. Bizarrely enough, I actually liked this episode. I thought this was a good episode. The opening sequence of seeing the inside of the construction of the uniform was really well done, and it was fascinating. It was a change of perspective, and it gave a real sense of what the Discovery is doing in terms of the quantum, mixing physics and biology, and playing around with what the universe is made up of. So thematically, it was actually a really cool shot. Visually, it was a very cool shot. Loved that as an opening. And then it's immediately undercut by them basically reiterating what happened at the end of the last episode. Now, I get that people seem to think that if you watch television, you're stupid, but we're not that stupid. Like, we can follow at the end of the last episode, she got hired basically as an officer. At the start of this episode, they're telling us again she got hired as an officer. We didn't need reminded. It was literally at the end of the last episode. Um, so there seems to be a slight assumption that viewers can't keep up with this highly complex storyline. I think the producers really need to trust their viewership a lot more, because this was wasted dialogue, this was wasted information that could have been used for something else. Admittedly, it's only a few seconds, but it was a shame to have such a good opening shot and then to immediately talk down to your viewer. Um, Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about here is we've in this episode, there are a couple of scenes without Michael, which I really, really like. It's starting to build this sense of the the crew on board the Discovery in the same way that in Next Generation there was the whole bridge crew and there were all of these different interactions. The strange thing about this is on that bridge crew, we don't know the names of anyone. They haven't been introduced. We know nothing about their personalities. We just see we see a lot of shots of their face, particularly when they're playing that communication about the settlement being bombed, and they're all looking very worried and pensive. You know, that's great. I have no idea who any of these people are. You haven't introduced them. You haven't given me their names, what their characters are, even what their role is on board the ship. So that seems like a significant oversight, in terms of building a complete narrative that's going to support all of these stories. So, brief synopsis of the episode. Um, the Discovery receives a distress call and a mission to teleport over to this colony that's under attack from the Klingons. And they need to get the drive working in time. They've captured this big tardigrade that's in a cell, and they need to find out a way to use it to do the teleporting. That's basically it. It's a simple, straightforward plot. There's a problem. They need to solve it and save the day. Great, grand, fine. Absolutely on board with this. Not every episode can be about encountering a brave new species or a new civilization. Here we have they've encountered an alien and they're trying to figure out what it is. The problem I have with this episode is they keep setting Michael up as the savior, who if only people listened to her, everything would be fine. We have Michael paired off with Landry to experiment on the tardigrade, to find out, can they weaponize it? Can they use something about its biology as a weapon in the war against the Klingons? And Michael wants to pursue one line of research. Landry ignores her. Michael warns Landry not to provoke it. Landry ignores her. And then Landry gets killed because she didn't listen to Michael, and Michael didn't save her in time. Michael's line of inquiry, then, lo and behold, is the missing piece to everything, and she solves the entire problem. Now, I get that she's the central character. I get that, she's meant to be incredibly intelligent. But would it really have killed the writers for Michael to explain what she was thinking to Stamets and for Stamets to make the connection? And that way, the team of Michael and Stamets working together solve the issue. It's not all then on Michael's shoulders and Michael being brilliant. It's about Michael working as part of the crew, re-earning her place in the Federation, re-earning her place in Starfleet by working with the other officers, by supporting the other officers. Isn't that part of this story? This is meant to be her redemption. And yet we seem to be doubling down on the, well, everyone should just do what Michael says because Michael is always right. It just seems that for such a simple change in the narrative, you could have created a much more cohesive approach to, it's about a ship, it's about a crew, it's about the team. And yet, no, it's all still just about Michael. And then we have these very odd moments where details that we have been told are suddenly ignored. So, for instance, we see Lorca and Michael at the very close to the beginning, walking along a dark corridor that is then lighting up as they get to that section. Yet, in the very last episode, we are told that Lorca has a problem with sudden bright light. And he needs light to rise up gradually. And yet he's walking down this corridor and has no problem walking along and the darkness suddenly illuminating. And then they walk into a brightly lit lab and then draw attention to the fact that Lorca has a problem with light because he makes reference to the fact that the tardigrade doesn't like light. You go, stop drawing attention to the thing that you've ignored 5 seconds before. And again, this is one of those things that is a very, very easy fix. That as they're walking along, instead of having the light suddenly snap into effect, have the light slowly build up in front of them. So as they walk along, it slowly illuminates. They're at a walking pace. This is easy enough to do. And then when anyone else is walking along, you could do that effect of it suddenly lighting up, but contrast it for every time that Lorca is using the corridor. And that's just, it would be a simple little visual cue that Lorca has this issue. And even on that point, a number of the actors on Discovery are wearing various contact lenses. If Lorca has this issue with his eyes, and we're meant to slightly distrust him, he's meant to be slightly mysterious, why not give him contact lenses that address his problem with light? That he has to wear these contact lenses that are polarized so his eyes get darker or are mirrored, because that would make him slightly off-putting to look at. And, for us as viewers, when we keep thinking that the eyes are the window to the soul, anytime we see these this close-up of Lorca's eyes, if they were mirrored or silvered or are absolutely black, because he has this medical condition that they've had to put these filters in, suddenly that makes him more mysterious. It makes him less trustworthy. It makes him more engaging in this way. So you reiterate, we have the excuse that he doesn't like light. He prefers it coming up, but that's why he wears these, that he can deal with it. Because when we have that combat simulation at the very beginning that Michael walks into on the bridge, we have these bright explosions in front of the screen that Lorca is staring directly at, and he doesn't flinch. So again, we have the narrative telling us Lorca has a problem with sudden bright lights. And then we have the narrative showing us Lorca doesn't have a problem with sudden bright lights. And it's this lack of consistency. They keep telling us one thing and showing us a different thing. And I know these are very, very minor points, but it goes a lot of the way to selling the verisimilitude of the universe, to creating a compelling and authentic story world that these characters inhabit. We have this slight subplot about Captain Giorgio's telescope, and Michael, who has solved all of these problems and done all of these things, needs a rousing speech from Tilly to get the confidence to open it. This felt like such a forced speech, and it feels like they're forcing this relationship between Tilly and Michael, because Michael is a disgraced senior officer. Tilly is a cadet with no experience who babbles all the time, and yet for some reason Michael finds her really likable and listens to her, and she gives this sage wisdom. It it just seems like such a strange mishmash of what they're trying to do with the characters. It's sort of forced. They have them in the same room. They have them as roommates. This could have been a much more gradual process over the course of it. That instead of Tilly offering things, that Michael becomes mentor to Tilly, and that develops the relationship and the rapport. Because Tilly advising Michael just seems wrong. Tilly pointing things out to Michael just seems wrong. It's the inverse of the sort of established hierarchy and relationship that we would expect. And there's no reason for that inversion. There's no reason to subvert that. We're not given a reason why Michael is looking at her with anything other than perhaps contempt or at least tolerance. We run back into my problem with Saru. Michael uses him as a test to see whether the tardigrade is dangerous, because Saru, his ganglia can mystically tell if something is a threat. And we see that his ganglia react to her and then not to her. So it's clearly not infallible. And yet she takes this as absolute proof that the tardigrade isn't dangerous. And then we have the moment. So she's been led into this very secret research lab and summons Saru there without telling Lorca. Not only that, shortly afterwards, she summons Tilly. You go, is nothing top secret on this ship? Are there no security clearances? Is everyone just cleared to go wherever they want? Because the first thing that Burnham mentions about this room is that it is full of the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. And Lorca clearly regards this as a private research venue where he studies these deadly weapons. And yet she just brings in Saru and Tilly, and neither of them remark on, oh my God, the captain has a whole load of illegal weapons here. Oh, this is a bit strange. They just walk in and go, what's up? So again, we have this conflict in the narrative between what it keeps implying and telling us about things, and then what it then shows us. Because Michael could have requested Stamets bring up or deliver some of the spores for her to use in her experiment. And he sends Tilly up. So she hears the door, she walks to the door, and Tilly tries to look in, and Michael goes, no, takes the spores from her and closes the door in her face. Again, respecting that Michael is being involved in something that Tilly doesn't know about, doesn't have access to. And then that could be something that she then talks to Tilly about and opens up about. She apologizes for being so rude to Tilly. And there's your introduction into Michael slowly realizing she needs to interact more with the crew. But instead, no, it's Tilly, the cadet, just walks straight into the super secret research lab again. And on this point, about the tardigrade fears light. It constantly hides in darkness, and yet the brightly glowing spores are the things that it wants. Why say it fears light and then the thing that it wants to cavort around in make them brightly glowing. Like, stop setting up the contradiction. It makes your narrative feel that it's slightly broken. Why not say that the tardigrade fears loud noises and have like a sonar field or something? Like, those are ways to manipulate it. Um, but suddenly it's attracted to bright lights, even though it fears them. And the tardigrade has been set up in this cell, and Lorca at the beginning is at great pains to say that this creature can rip its way through the outer hull of a spaceship. Yet the cell is made of metal. Presumably, the outside of a spaceship is made of the strongest metal they have, and yet the tardigrade is not clawing its way out of the cell. The force field is only at the front. So why not have that animation at the front that when the tardigrade moves, you see the ripple of the force field inside, that it's actually being held in a complete force field? Why have it exposed to the metal when you say that it can rip through the metal? Again, it's these tiny details that, because they're not consistent or because they require some sort of explanation that's not in the narrative, for them to make any sense, because we don't have that explanation, because they don't seem to make sense with the information we're provided, it makes the narrative feel false. It makes it feel artificial, and it makes it feel less believable. It is harder to suspend your disbelief when all of the information is constantly undercut and subverted by what you see on screen. Um, Now, there was obviously that interesting interlude with the various Klingons. Um, for some reason, both of the first two Klingon scenes open with reminding us that only 6 months have gone by. I don't know why they need to keep saying that. But the Klingons apparently have run out of food, but they have some power because there's power on all over the ship. So why aren't their replicators working? We know that Klingons have replicator technology. So why aren't their replicators working? Is this so that at the end we can have that, oh, the guy that had come to apologize has stolen the crew with food reveal moment? Again, it looking at these things, you could have exactly the same thing where this general sees this as an opportunity, sees that this guy is weak, and while he is away getting whatever component, um, uses that as an opportunity to suborn the crew and to steal the ship. In fact, while they're away on the Shinzo trying to get this thing, that guy could have said, yes, I had a spare one of those on my ship. So I beamed it aboard, saved everyone, and we flew off and stranded you there. Why this whole subterfuge about, oh, you're being betrayed, oh, you're being betrayed, and then, oh no, she didn't betray you, she came back for you? It feels convoluted and false. And we keep seeing this information that you go, why are you making it more complicated than it needs to be? Why are you saying, oh, they have no food, but they have all the power in the world to make their replicators work, even if it's basic? Oh, they have all of these ruined ships around them, but none of them had supplies. Again, like, I get that they want that scene of of the purest Klingon saying, "Oh, I don't want to take Federation technology," and then having to make that compromise. It's an interesting approach, and it strikes an interesting balance about how ideology meeting the practical realities of a situation can be challenged. But at the same time, could you not come up with a slightly better reason that this seems glib and facetious and superficial? In much the same way that the spore drive is called the dispersal activated um, no, displacement activated spore hub drive. Displacement activated spore hub drive. So clearly the writers desperately wanted to call it Dash because it gets you there really quickly. That is just a terrible acronym, and it's solely there so it makes the word Dash. Fine. But to get back to the Klingons raiding the Shinzo, so Saru was very proud of the fact in the previous episode he'd been promoted because of his actions on the Shinzo at the Battle of the Binary Stars. And they left enough technology and stuff on board without scuttling the ship, without disabling all of the stuff on the ship, without making sure there was no technology that the Klingons could steal. That's what Saru's proud of. He's even more of a failure as a character than I thought, because he's been given this commendation and promotion based on what he did at the Battle of the Binary Stars. But because the show showed us what happened at the Binary Stars, he did nothing. He didn't do anything heroic. He didn't follow particularly any course of action. He didn't beam across and do anything. He did nothing. He just stood around looking gormless. And then when they evacuated the Shinjo, left everything on board for the Klingons to steal instead of scuttling the ship as the senior officer should, to stop the enemy getting succor and supplies from your ship. But again, this goes back to the point of the show keeps telling us things and then showing us something completely different. You could have had, instead of it being the Shinzo, or that Vok had gone to a different Federation ship, the Admiral's flagship, that no one had thought to scuttle because it was so badly wrecked, but it actually had the thing that they needed. And therefore we could blame the Admiral. Or it could be that this is setting up Saru has been falsely promoted, that it comes to light later on that he didn't deserve this promotion because it was actually a failure and it was a political move to promote him. And it makes him rethink who he is and try to become a better officer. Those are things that you can do with this event. But to ignore that the event exists ignores an opportunity in the narrative and ignores an opportunity to develop the narrative in a different direction and actually to develop the character. So despite that bit of a rant about it, I did like this episode. It was fascinating. But let's get on to the action sequence where they eventually teleport across the galaxy to get to rescue the colonists. So they plug in the tardigrade, and it has a map of all of the different coordinates of these star systems in its head. And they teleport directly into the atmosphere right above the settlement so that they can fight the Klingons straight away. Why did they teleport directly into the atmosphere? I mean, that is a staggering coincidence. Teleporting into the star system would be astronomical enough, particularly because this is their first jump doing this, that, everything works perfectly. No, have them teleport into the star system and go, that's as close as I can get you, and the Klingons suddenly break away. You could have the sequence play out exactly the same way, with Lorca having kill off the first couple of Klingons, then lure the others in, teleport away as they have left their bombs behind. That entire action sequence can play out exactly the same way without them teleporting in to 200 meters of the settlement and hovering directly above it. That just seems really strange. And the second thing is, there was a scene in Battlestar Galactica, the series, that was so well done. And it's when the Galactica entered atmosphere and then basically teleported away, blinked away. And the displacement of that volume of ship creates a vacuum and suddenly the air rushes up. It really sold that scene because there was a physical reality to it suddenly vanishing. Here, the Discovery blinks away, and although it is suddenly displaced and all of the air that it had pushed out with its volume rushes back in, that isn't on screen. So it's a really cool visual effect, the way that it sort of folds up in space. But they left out that inrushing of the air. And in fact, if they are in an atmosphere, and this was the trick that Lorca wanted to play, if you can imagine that you were in a ship flying towards something, and then suddenly there was a huge amount of drag from the atmosphere pulling you into a place that you weren't expecting, you hadn't accounted for. That would be a wonderful sort of use of it, that Lorca does this, that he's bringing them all in a wee bit closer than they intended. And that was why he was able to bomb them. You go, it's a clever use of what you're doing in the narrative. And it sells it as being authentic. It sells it as being real, as opposed to just a gimmicky special effect. But like I said, I like the episode. Then the very last thing about this battle, this is a top secret. No one's meant to know about it. Only the senior most personnel in the Federation, in Starfleet, know about what Lorca is doing. So they teleport in directly in front of all of the colonists. And they all see the ship. And then they all see the ship vanish. And they go, oh, who rescued us? Well, the Federation isn't going to execute them all or send them all off to an internment camp to stop them talking. So they're going to talk about the fact that this ship appeared out of nowhere and then disappeared out of nowhere. There goes your surprise. There goes your top secret experiment. If it had happened in space, where he had beamed in orbit above the planet, the colonists would have just seen the ship sort of blink in as a bright light in the sky, the way that we've seen ships arrive from warp. They wouldn't know what had happened. They would have seen the explosions of the space battle. And then you could have still had exactly the same thing of the ships coming in, teleporting away, and them not realizing that he'd left all those bombs behind or the torpedoes behind that blow them up. Then their debris could rain down like fireworks, instead of raining down like burning wreckage that's going to kill all of the people in the settlement, because this is thousands of tons of burning, red hot, fiery metal that is raining down on their settlement when they have no shields. Like, Lorca could have picked a slightly better place for this trap, because he's probably just caused the death of half of the settlers, because it's just raining debris on them. But again, I liked this episode. It was an entertaining episode. And then one very last thing about the settlement, Saru calculates with hours, minutes, and seconds exactly how long it's going to take the Klingons to take the settlement. And that's the time frame. You go, that's just ridiculous. You don't know what weapons they have, how many times they have to recharge, whether they're going to get reinforcements. There's no way you can predict with any sort of accuracy how long it's going to take the Klingons to destroy the shields around the settlement. But Saru apparently presents this information as fact, and it just is annoying. Stop doing this. There's no need for it. Saru could very easily have said, at the rate they are going, or at the rate of destruction, they will have taken the settlement in under 5 hours or in under 6 hours, because that's all you need. You need the time frame, the time crunch. That's what you want to emphasize. That's the narrative point. All the rest of it is just gibberish that then makes it sound silly. There are too many variables to predict how long the Klingons will get through that shield. Whether or not some of the fighters will peel away, whether or not some other fighters will come and back them up. But if he'd said, instead of that line of dialogue, if he had said, at the current rate, they will have taken the settlement in just under 6 hours, Captain. Lo and behold, it's exactly the same information, really. It fulfills the same narrative function, but it doesn't sound as silly. Again, I actually quite enjoyed the episode. Jason Isaacs as Lorca is great. It was a real shame that Landry died. She was one of the most interesting sort of, well, when I say one of the most interesting, she's one of the few characters on Discovery we'd actually been introduced to. So it's disappointing to see one of them go. Plus, she was clearly top dog, cast in Lorca's image, and would have been a good foil for Michael, because Michael is obviously headstrong and smart and always thinks she's right. Landry was headstrong, smart, and always thinks that she's right. You had great sort of antagonism between the two as they were forced to work together. That could have been a great dynamic to explore. Instead, we're left with Saru, who just makes these passive aggressive comments, and and Tilly, who, again, I'm not sold on that relationship. It seems the wrong way around. And Stamets I like Stamets having that, being slightly distracted. Yes, it's a bit of a cliche about scientists, but the slightly distracted, and oh, this solves this, and oh, this is great. I like him. Played very well. But those are my thoughts on episode 4. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.